Hi, I'm Stephen Fleener, and I want to tell you about the lesson plans with the visual non-glossary. If you're looking at a lesson plan right now, the first slide should look really similar to this. All of the lesson plans in the visual non-glossary are structured very similarly, and I want to tell you about them. The first three slides are for your eyes only. Anything with a gray background is meant only as information for you, the teacher. You don't need to show these to the students. You have a guide to icons, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We have an accommodations for beginner or newcomer emergent bilingual students. If you have those students in your class, you might want to take a look at these strategies or these accommodations. And there's also an informative slide towards the end that has listed all of the different extension activities in this lesson. But I want to tell you about the crux of this lesson, really the most important slide in this lesson. And if you're considering using any aspect of this lesson plan, the one that I would encourage you to use the most is the first observational question. And that's the first question that has this orange, the first slide that has this orange background. This slide is going to feature the full structured visual. And it's also going to feature a structure for structuring the conversation around this visual called the QSSSA method or the QSSSA method. And that stands for question, sentence stem, signal, share, and assess. And if you're unfamiliar with this process, let me explain how it works. We're going to ask a question and we're going to provide a sentence stem. And then we're going to ask all of our students to show a signal. Maybe it's all the students put their thumb up. Maybe it's all the students raise their hand. As the teacher, you get to move these brackets to decide how that's going to go. I'm going to say all the students are going to put their hand on their head like this. They all put their hand on their head, and I'm going to instruct my students to bring their hand down when they can finish this sentence or when they can answer this question. And when all the students bring their hands down, they're ready to answer the question or they're ready to finish the sentence. Then I'm going to instruct my students to share either with their table group or maybe their elbow partner. I'm going to instruct who's going to go first, maybe the student with the brightest shirt or maybe the student closest to the window. And I'm also going to let students know how I'm going to assess them. Most of the time, what I really recommend doing is selecting this first icon and randomly calling on one or more students after they've shared in their small group or with their elbow partner. Now, these icons, if you're unfamiliar with them, that's back here on slide 2. There's a guide that shows what all of these icons represent. So you can always refer back to these if you're ever unsure about what these icons mean. This is a structured conversation slide, and there's going to be at least 3 structured conversation slides in every single lesson because there's at least 3 questions that are associated with this structured visual. So for the structured visual for American Expeditionary Forces, there is an observational question. What did the American Expeditionary Forces contribute to World War I? There is a relational question that you'll always see in purple. How are the American Expeditionary Forces related to the Treaty of Versailles? And then finally, there's an inferential question, which is always going to be in blue. This is always the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. And this is something that I really recommend having students complete this question, have them discuss it in small groups, definitely do the QSSA process, but it oftentimes is a really great question to be the exit ticket of the lesson. Because if all students can answer in writing a complete answer to this question using the key academic vocabulary, then that demonstrates their real understanding and mastery of both the vocabulary word and the concepts or the language behind that lesson. So I really recommend having students complete this final inferential question in writing. You're also going to see other visuals in a lesson plan. Typically, you're going to see other visuals that relate to this vocabulary word or this visual. In this case, we're seeing a visual for the American Expeditionary Forces, and we have the entry-level observational question about it. We'll see a visual for Treaty of Versailles with the entry-level observational question about it. The reason why we're seeing the Treaty of Versailles visual is because the relational question, the purple question, is asking about how the AEF is related to the Treaty of Versailles. So the lesson plan is going to build students up. It's going to scaffold for them throughout the lesson where they become increasingly familiar with the concept, they explore it at increasingly deep levels, and they're able by the end of the lesson to answer these key vocabulary words. Also, what I really recommend starting every lesson with is a warm-up. That's always slide 4, and it's always really simple. It's having students write down or maybe share with their shoulder partner or their elbow partner a list of things they notice in the visual. It can be anything. They can say 1.2 million, or they can say November 1918, or they can say a sad face. They can say anything. They just make a list, and as they're creating that list, they're really exploring this visual in depth in a really low stakes way. And again, everything on the visual non-glossary lesson plans are entirely editable. So I could change this to 7 things if I wanted to, and maybe 3 things that we wonder about in this image. So all this is editable, and I really recommend starting every lesson as the bell ringer or the warm-up. Just have students make a quick list and share it with their partner. There's also objectives that come with every single lesson. The content objective is always going to be super basic. It's always just going to be, today we will learn about the term blank. And please feel free to edit this as it relates to your learning standards. But as I like to say, a written down content objective that students interact with is way better than no content objective. And so this provides at least a skeleton for a content objective. The language objective that's presented to students is always going to be that final inferential question with the expectation that students answer the question using the vocabulary words right here in their response. And this is really key for setting up the expectation that after they have this conversation, they will answer the question in writing. But it's also really key in setting up what the key language of the lesson is going to be. There's a purpose that they have to be able to answer this question using these key vocabulary words. So slide 6 is going to give students the opportunity to participate in a small group structured conversation, again with the QSSSA process, where you can choose the signal, whom they're going to share with, and who's going to go first, and they can choose any one of these stems to relate to the visuals that are shown. Now there's one other thing that I want to show. The visuals that are shown here in the objectives are much more simplified version of the visuals. Take a look at this visual for the American Expeditionary Forces, and take a look at this visual for the structured conversation about the American Expeditionary Forces. This visual is a lot bigger and a lot simpler, and that's because this is a word wall visual that students can just glance at any point in the lesson or in subsequent lessons. So the 2 or 3 slides that have the word wall visuals on them are always hidden, and they're always a single slide. This allows you to print off this slide on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and then you can paste it anywhere in the room. And they're designed so that in a typically sized classroom, students at any place in the room will be able to see this visual and will be able to read it. Much bigger, much simpler. The other thing that I want to show are the extension activities. There's 6 extension activities. They don't have to all be used. They can be used before the lesson, after the lesson, during the lesson, maybe at the end of the unit or the beginning of the unit. They're just designed to have students interact with the visual, interact with the language. So for example, there's the activity Complete the Picture that has students try to guess what the rest of the picture might look like. Fill it in has students try to fill in the label. You get to decide whether or not you want to give students a word bank for this activity. And then there's key writing activities like a roving paragraph that comes with transition words that help students build a paragraph, or even the expectation to write a full paragraph using all the stems from the lesson. So these extension activities and all of the structured conversations are designed to get students to be practicing using the word many times throughout the lesson, verbally in context, in small groups, and in the whole class setting. And the idea is that at the end of the lesson, or maybe several hours after the lesson, if someone asks the student, what did they learn about in their class today? They are probably going to have as their first response this vocabulary word. They're probably going to say the American Expeditionary Forces. And then if someone says, well, what did you learn about them? They'll be able to go into much greater depth and elaborate on the Treaty of Versailles and the Battle of Argonne Forest and all these other key vocabulary words that appeared in the visual and came up in their conversations. Please feel free to get in touch with me through our website if you have any questions about how this lesson works. And I really look forward to you using it. Thank you for using the Visual Non-Glossary.